I'd encourage everybody listening to ask themselves, do I know beauty when I see it?
Mm,
You don't have to define it in exact terms, but do I know what beauty? Do I know what is beautiful? Is this beautiful?
mm,
Can I find beauty in this?
mm,
And I think as time goes on, it's actually astonishing how present beauty is, how those transcendentals we find goodness, beauty, and truth. They're very often where we least expect to find them.
We are live here today, Born Free Millennial Podcast. I have a very special guest, Will Anselm, and we're going to be talking about the art of beholding beauty, not consuming it. And before we get started, Will and I actually met each other through Twitter, through X. I'd say 2 years now. We've known each other, and we were just talking about this before we got started. I think we had some mutual acquaintances that really big into Lord of the Rings. Will's big into Lord of the Rings. I think if you follow me, you know I'm big into Lord of the Rings. So we kind of knew each other, and then I posted something on X just saying, "Hey, if you can answer my riddle, I'll like repost something for you." And then Will answered my riddle, so it was kind of a cool little, I'd say Lord of the Rings-esque way that we became friends was through riddles. And then Will actually had this really cool Piper of Hamlin narration that you did over a video, and I posted that. So that's kind of how we got to know each other. But I'm going to introduce Will really quick, and then Will, I'll let you take over here. But Will's a medieval art historian, and Will is a grad from Oxford. And your focus, Will, right, is medieval art history with a specific focus on the depictions of Jesus Christ, if I'm correct, right?
In the late medieval Italy, yeah.
Late medieval Italy, and currently you're in the UK, but you spent some time in Italy as well.
Yeah. When I started my undergrad in Florence and then came back, was in just near London for a bit, and then I taught and researched in Rome and in Milan for a bit. So the first chunk of my 20s surrounded by really good food. Yeah.
Oh, I could only imagine. I've got some family that live in Turin that I need to go visit. They have a pizzeria up there, and we've had a few family go out there, but I can only imagine being in that area. Bet you were spoiled with some good food.
Very good food.
And I mean, the topic that we're talking about today, right? Artwork. I mean, gosh, if I could think about places in the world, I mean, there's so many, right? But if I could think about places I'd want to go to look at art, I think Italy would be right at the top there. And that was part of why I wanted to reach out and have a discussion with you. Because lately, I would say, like, when I'm traveling around the country in my RV, I really do enjoy going to art museums and spending time there. And I think that's been something that I've done more often, I think, I would say post divorce, where I've been reconnecting with myself and reconnecting with Christ. And there's something about art to me that really speaks to me. So I thought it would be an interesting episode for us today to really compare and contrast, right? Because we live in a time today where, we have our phones, right? And we can just pull up anything that we want to see. Uh, Oftentimes, right? The topic of my podcast, what I talk about, right? We can use our phones to look up beauty, but I'd say in a different way where we're consuming it. And that's what I wanted to get out today. Like, really, the heart of the conversation is just talking about like history of art and how beauty is depicted and how it shapes culture, or if it's a reflection of culture. and really start there. Start with your knowledge of history of art and how beauty was depicted, and then I think we can talk through that. And then I think as we go, we can talk more about comparing, contrasting to culture today. Definitely the topic of pornography, because I know whenever you're in an art history museum, right, there's going to be naked women in there, but it's a little bit of a different, I would say, depiction compared to what you would pull up on a phone or a laptop. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand it off to you. I think we're going to walk through a little bit of some history here, but I'll hand it over to you, Will.
Lead no follow, Max. I don't have one fatal flaw. I don't have the piece of paper in front of me.
Oh,
So,
no problem.
give me prompts and I'll. There's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
much
yeah,
I could
yeah.
go on for hours.
Yeah, yeah. No,
I see Linda's here. She knows that I can talk for hours. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. So here, I'll restart that. So let's just talk about, really first, before we talk about anything, talk about your just you being an art historian. Like, what is that? Like, what does that mean to be an art historian? Maybe a little bit of like how you got into it. I think that would be a good starting place, just to talk through just how you got into it and what a medieval art historian does. I think that'd be a good starting point.
yeah. So I think it's how did I get into it? So I was really fortunate to be able to. I was accepted to study on a very sort of experimental, it literally was the second year that it was running, this program that was attempting to reboot the kind of education and the connection with the past. It's kind of, we could just call it liberal arts for the sake of
Yeah.
brevity. So we were, throughout over some months, some time, studying with this organization called the Benedictus Trust. And at that point in time, I was dead set on studying Latin and Greek, Cambridge, classics at Cambridge, and then I was going to be a lawyer or something like that. And
Okay.
during the course of this summer school program, we were handling books in the morning, and in the afternoon we were in museums all around London with world leading experts. And by the end of the program, I just sat down, and this was through the summer holidays. So by the end of the program, I just sort of sat there and I thought, I need to. I think I'm going to go study art history, and it just so happened that I made that decision in time. So a week, 2 weeks later, I found myself moving to Florence at the ripe old age of 19, and we started old school. So we went. There are a lot of people have a really weird view of art history these days because, like, the academy, universities are in a really bad shape anyway. But there are some subjects which have really been infiltrated by a lot of theory and politics,
Mm.
right? So there are some people who ostensibly, there are some professors who have doctorates in art history who started their study in the 18th century. They started with Cézanne or Picasso or something like that, and they have no history. They have no training or familiarity that goes all the way right the way back. So there I
Mm.
was in Florence, and we started right the way back with Egyptian art and Egyptian sculpture, and doing, the first year was just a survey. Moving forward, European art, by the way. So if you ask me to, translate some tea packets from China or something, cupboard's bare. But right the way through, and being in Florence as well, I had such a profoundly, it sounds like such a wet thing to say, but such a profoundly spiritual experience, because when you're Florence is so well preserved, and when you're walking through the streets, Michelangelo's David is still where it was.
Mm.
And so being immersed in it, it wasn't just study, it really became a really solid and integral part of just me and everything around me. And I decided that I wanted to continue, and specialized and lasered in on medieval Italy, specifically the emergence of how Christ and the passion and the suffering and the humanity of Christ were evolved. And so yeah, that's it in the pot. What do I do? A lot of writing, a lot of time in basements and archives, and there's a lot of disciplines now where everything's digitized, but you
Right.
know not so with art history. So you have to go places. But yeah, I'm finishing and getting this thesis done. And when that's done, it'll be, well, yeah, we'll see what happens next. But writing and teaching mostly, I think.
Ah, that's neat. So I picture you as like the Gandalf meme, right? Where he's in Minas
Yeah,
Tirith and he's like
yeah.
flipping through like all the old dusty things.
I just saw that yesterday. I just watched it again. Because the extendeds have come back, right? I watched the
Which one did you
Fellowship.
watch?
I watched the
Okay,
Fellowship.
that's funny. I was watching The Two Towers. I was like, I had to get in the mood. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, that's awesome. But no, that's kind of what I picture is like you going through these manuscripts and these old ancient works, which I'm sure you do, right? You go through like old stuff, like
Yeah,
books and
so what? Because yeah. So I mean, and it's also weird things that you come across when you're doing original research. Things like, there are archives that just warehouse wills, last wills and testaments of
Mm,
people in the 14th century,
that's
because
wild.
because a lot of there's a branch of art history called provenance, and where was this object at this time? Did somebody buy it? Is this original? And then you get into the other side of art history, which is more of the gallery art business, art market side, when people are valuing and
Mm.
appraising, is this a fake? And one of my mentors worked for the Nazi looted art commission, so he was a kind of a Nazi hunter and an art historian, and he worked in a bunker. He worked in
What?
a bunker in Switzerland or something, and he went underground, and they were trying to track down all of the art that went missing, that was confiscated and disappeared or might have been blown up
Ah,
during the first half of the 20th century. And we're talking about works by people like Raphael. I mean, there are works by there's a couple of paintings in particular that we only know they exist because photography had just come in, so we've got a photograph of what they look like. um he has a pretty good idea of where it is. It's either in a Swiss bank vault or it was blown up in an air raid, but
wow. Dang. Okay. Okay. So you might be pulled into some mission potentially if you
I
got
hope
to steal
not.
it
I
back or
hope not.
something.
I hope not.
Well,
The
that's a
food
good
isn't good in
starting point.
Switzerland. The food isn't as good.
It's not. Oh, it's funny. Um, well, that's kind of maybe that's an interesting segue because, uh, like what I got from some of that, besides like, yeah, just really neat background and thanks for sharing that. Just the importance of art, right? Of even back then, right? Like in these like tracking down Nazis and where they might have stashed this artwork or whatever. There's meaning to it, right? There's meaning to this art that I think maybe in this day and time, I think a lot of us take for granted or we don't even think about really. And I think we talked about that a little bit when we were prepping a little bit for the podcast. I was telling you about some of these art museums I've been to across the country. And yeah, some it's like people are really engaged, some people aren't. And yeah, hopefully we can kind of get across in this podcast just the importance of it, right? The importance of art and then beauty in art. So I know we were talking a little bit about this when we were prepping, but would you mind? Like I think where I wanted to go with some of this conversation is a little bit about like how women were depicted or how beauty was depicted historically through artwork, and with your expertise talking about that. So maybe we could go there if you want, and we could talk a little bit about whatever starting point you want to go to, because I know we were talking a little bit about like Hellenistic period, things like that. But I think it'd be interesting to talk through with your expertise of just uh, how like women have been depicted over time. We can talk about men too, of course, but like the form and what kind of standards were there back then? Because now, right, it's just like, heck, you watch the halftime show for the Super Bowl this weekend, I'm sure it's gonna, or even I was just seeing stuff on Twitter like last night with the Olympics, just kind of crazy stuff. You're just
Yeah.
like, can we just be normal here?
Well,
So
the,
yeah,
the Olympic the
yeah.
Olympics is a good segue into it, right? Originally having its origin in Greece, and
Yeah.
so the idea in the first instance of women participating in the Olympics in ancient Athens was just, as Greek as a Turkey Twizzler, really. Impossible, right? But certainly, moreover, um, it's strange to consider the I mean, women are now basically wearing underwear in public. You know, that there is this
Right.
weird thing that is, and just to be clear, but stick with me a little bit because I'm not just going to be bashing
Right.
those
No,
naughty
of
women.
course.
No, but the the we've ended up quite literally. That's such a brilliant way in. We now have women competing and performing in the Olympics and getting ready for that, and everything associated with it. And basically, the female body is on display at this supposedly ancient traditional sports ceremony. And when you think of how the people who started, when one thinks of the Athenians at the time of the Ionian Enlightenment, you know, the idea of seeing a nude female body in the public square at all was sort of unthinkable for a variety of
Mm.
reasons, which are not. Uh, there are lots of different reasons, and remember that we're talking about hundreds of years. Some so glossing over that, but we were talking, I think, about how the earliest depictions of the human form, or the ones that we start with in art history, the kouros. You've all seen the statues, the carved statues of men with one foot forward in the contrapposto. You know, the Metropolitan kouros. If anybody's interested, I will make sure that everything I refer to, I'll create a little extra Substack article. So if people want to see the images of anything that I'm talking to, they can go.
Oh, that would be great. I'll write some of this down too as we're talking.
So the the Greeks inherited this sculpture tradition from the Egyptians, broadly speaking, and all of the depictions were of men. And broadly speaking, the male form was originally depicted very crudely and geometrically. There was
Mm.
an attempt. There wasn't even, you could say. I mean, it's almost like literally drawn with stencils. So you know, it would be an unnatural arch for the rib cage. It would almost be like a triangle. They had
Mm.
no necessarily great desire to attempt to make the body look like a body. Maybe because of technical limitations, maybe also because art meant, meant it existed in a different context. It had a different function for them. But all of these famous sculptures are of men. There are some that appear a little bit later of women, but the women are always clothed, and they're called
Mm.
kore. And it's interesting, just as a jumping off point, to consider that at various points in history, not just in the prudish Middle Ages, as people like to think of it, or in the prudish Tudor times, or the time of the founding fathers, when everybody was backwards and they didn't know any, they were all prejudiced or whatever, all of this nonsense that we hear. No, even earlier, way back. And I think that was one of our really great jumping off points, discussing the idea that women's bodies were treated in such a different category
Mm.
to male bodies in certainly the ancient Mediterranean, and it remained that way for a very long time. I don't want to jump forward too much, but um, we can see, I think, not necessarily making an historical point here, but there is something I think that we, certainly maybe some of your listeners, would kind of want to yearn for
Mm.
in that men, of course, we all have to have, as my friend Donique reminded me the other day, custody of our eyes, all of us, men and women, because women can also be incited to
Yeah.
get lustful gazes as well. We all have to have custody of our eyes, but it's how difficult it is when the standard of what the beauty or the management or carrying of their own bodies today is so far away from what what got us to this point in the first place. It's such a difficult thing. We must have custody of our eyes, but by all means, I know that all of us from time to time would be glad of a bit of a helping hand from going to the gym. And I mean, bring back men only gyms. I mean, that's one of the solutions to it. And but also ban women wearing underwear and pretending that it's actual clothing. But you see, it's so that's, over the course
Yeah.
of like 6,000 years, here we are, and we've completely lost the plot just in terms of the kind of beauty that women are aspiring to, that is ultimately, I think, as we're seeing in many forms, one way or another, causing men to stumble at best, and at worst, causing them to make appalling choices for themselves because they're being bombarded with stuff that we have always known should be kept covered, should be kept almost sacred within
Mm.
within within the marriage home.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And when I'm thinking about this time that you're talking about here, uh, because the men were depicted naked, right?
Yeah.
A lot of them. Can you explain like why? Because sometimes I think about it and I'm like, well, why are like all the men naked? You know, like what's that about?
Well, one of the reasons really was because certainly there was a very famous sculptor called Polykleitos, a Greek sculptor, and Polykleitos wrote a treatise which has since lost to us. It was just, I think, one of the last few supposedly remaining copies was destroyed when the Library of Alexandria was burned down. But he wrote this book called the Canon, and we have an idea of what was contained in it. And it gives us a very strong idea of what, in the so-called classical period of classical Greek art, were the aesthetics, the purpose of art. And one of them was about proportion. The canon of Polykleitos, from what we can understand of it, sets out a system for mensurating or measuring the entirety of the ideal human form. You've all seen the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci,
Yeah.
the man with his arms out, with the circle and the square. This was a re-emergence of ideas about proportion and form the people like Polykleitos Polykleitos, Praxiteles, Phidias were working on. So it would be one of the main objectives, which it's a very good question. Why were the men naked? Was because one of the first and foremost objectives, we might say, was to master human proportion, and clothes got in the way of that, you
Mhm.
see. So, and the canon of Polykleitos is, the head would fit into the height of the head fits into the body about nine and a half times, and the distal phalanges and the proximal and distal bits of the finger all sit together in harmony. There is there are several concepts like symmetria and eurythmos. So, really, sculptors being able to show off how technically skilled they were, and as you move forward, when you go from what look like the ancient Egyptian stone statues that look awfully terrifying,
Yeah,
when you move forward to the Discobolus of Myron, or the famous disc thrower, all of the famous ones that you've
it's
seen,
amazing.
when you move forward, then the objective becomes how brilliantly and how accurately can we express the proportional unity of the human body, and clothes very much got in the way of that. And that's also one of the reasons why if you ever see, you'll notice is 1 foot forward. You'll find that the 1 foot is in these sculptures, there's 1 foot that's it's called the contrapposto. And one of the reasons for that is it gives even more opportunity for the perfection of a beautifully designed and maintained human figure to be shown off. Because when you have
Mm.
1 foot forward and 1 foot back, you end up with what's called like the curvilinear thing. So different muscles are engaged on one side and are relieved on the other. So
Oh yeah, that's cool.
anatomy was um this continues. This is one of the things that picks up. Leonardo da Vinci uh subsequently was accused of being a witch because he was so fastidiously committed to understanding the proportions and the anatomy of the human body that he went to morgues and he dissected corpses so he
Oh
could
wow.
understand. I mean, there are drawings of children in utero, of twins in the uterus, silver point drawings by Leonardo da Vinci. He was, but all of this stems back to this long-standing fixation of the human body is very beautiful, and it's been put together in this way for a reason. And also male nudity was normative in ancient Athens in very, very many respects. The gymnasium, again, this is, we can talk about what's gone on with men as well later, but
Yeah, we don't walk
men
around
were
naked
much more
anymore.
comfortable. Young men were raised to be, that was perfectly normal. And the same with the Roman baths as well. They had a completely different idea of what was normal male social behavior, and they saw nothing devious or disordered about it. However, the same would never be said for women.
Yeah, because you were talking about the body, and that all made sense to me, and that the clothes were in the way. But then, obviously, too, they'd be doing depictions of women, but they'd leave the clothes on, right? So they wouldn't even though they wanted to show off, or they wanted to show their skill, there'd still be like that respect, or that line there, like where they wouldn't depict the woman nude, right?
Yeah.
In the Greek times.
Yeah, there are, and we don't necessarily have entirely. I mean, some of these issues, all 6,000 years later, there's still a matter of the people, some brilliant people doing, deeper research and considering and evaluating and weighing up. This is one of the wonderful things about history done properly. Sometimes we can be aware of a plurality of possibilities, and
Mm,
it's a question of which one is the most balanced and the most informed. But fundamentally, at the very least, I think it came into our pre-chat simply because, can you imagine? Can you imagine what? I mean, there would be plenty of people who would be very unhappy, male and female, if there was such a concept of women's bodies being uh, fundamentally different for whatever reason. Like, let's just say, let's not get into the philosophical or
sure.
cultural, but for whatever reason, yeah, and there are some very good reasons which we'll talk about. But lots of what would the feminists have to say about this, and also what would the Goonie men have to say? Who with the wandering eyes when they're down at the dog park or on the morning run. A lot of people would be unhappy about such a suggestion that women ought to be a little bit more covered. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's really good. So we are talking about early Greek times, and then I think what we wanted to jump to when we were talking, which I thought was pretty fascinating, was I think you mentioned that there started to be a little bit of a shift with the standards in the when Alexander the Great started to take over, right?
Yeah. Again, this is the there are two reasons. Yeah, so there are three main stages of ancient Greek art that are kind of lumped together, and they're kind of 250 to 300 years by and large, and they don't move sort of seamlessly from one to the other. The archaic, which is when everything is geometrical and rigid. I'm oversimplifying, but I will go into greater detail in this post article for
Yes.
anybody who's interested. So all firm and rigid, and then the classical, which is sort of the Discobolus, the body starts opening out. There are technical reasons for this as well, because whenever you puncture through a piece of marble, you compromise its structural integrity. So uh, the development of the skill of being a sculptor working in stone, sometimes in bronze as well, the same principle applies. If you have an arm out here, uh, you know, you've compromised the structural integrity. You have to be a better sculptor in order to create more perforations in it. So the opening out of the sculpture and the depiction of the human form evolves alongside changes in cultural attitudes as well, and also approaches to beauty and what art is for. So archaic, we're just creating like an action man figure. It doesn't, or a Barbie doll. It doesn't look like a human. It's not supposed to. It's the equivalent of a child drawing a stick figure. It's a circle. It's not quite. And
Right.
then we get the muscle, the sinew, the detail in the
Mm.
classical. And then by the Hellenistic, there is a very famous sort of textbook Hellenistic sculpture, the Laocoonte, priest of a priest who's mentioned extensively in Greek myth, who is wrestling with a serpent uh, and every limb is all over the place. It's in the Vatican museums. There have been a couple of replicas made of it. Um, there is more perforated space than there is stone left. So it's kind
Oh,
of,
wow.
you
Yeah, I'm
know,
looking at it right now.
so
That's
you can
amazing.
imagine we've gone from everything being neatly and pinned together and joined at the sides. It's interesting. This isn't. When I say that there's technical developments and development of of the craft, the skill, the art, that's one side of things. But at the same time, there's also, as some people have suggested, um, a change in the way that even men are depicted in the Hellenistic era, and they start. You know, the treatment of the flesh and the muscle starts to be a bit softer, and the limbs. I mean, even Camille Paglia, of all people, wrote her doctoral thesis on, it touched on some of Camille Paglia of all people, and there's some of it that's very convincing in that, as I mentioned, um, she makes a claim which other art historians have made, that the changes to the depiction of the male form, but also the slack occur, or we have seen that changes fundamentally. You might call it the androgenizing of the male form,
Hmm.
co-occurring with wild and very unpredictable, well, not unpredictable, but very significant rapid changes in the sort of moral and cultural stability of a people. And remember that with the Ptolemies
Hmm.
and so on, there, there is, this is, it's not necessarily entirely my, you know, I wouldn't go to my grave holding to that point, but the reason why I think it's interesting is the same thing does happen in London and in America and across Europe in the 19th century, at the fin de siècle, at the turn of the 19th century into the 20th century. And you think of the rise of decadism and opium dens and the aesthetes. And of course, by this point in time, this was really when pornography started to be in mass circulation. This was the first time that we saw novels of, you know, novels that were deemed indecent. There would be, I mean, one of the reasons in the 19th century why young men decided that they wanted to be art historians was so that they could get access to the very extensive
No
collection
kidding.
of pornography in the basements of the
Wow.
British
You
Museum.
really had to work for it back then.
Right. So, I mean,
You had to go
and they
to you had
called
to
them,
go get
we,
credentials.
we would, and now today we'd call them gooners. Back then we'd call them antiquarians, you know. So, but I
Back
mean,
in my day.
so that's, there's something
Yeah.
interesting in that. And I do
Hmm.
wonder if we're seeing a bit of that again. That, and I think that leads on to one of our sort of key things is about, you know, a lot of people would say beauty is subjective, and everybody, some would say, has the right to pursue or desire or move towards what they personally consider to be beautiful. And that is the kind of rebuttal to the flagrant emergence of gross indecency, the kind that sent Oscar Wilde to prison. You know, that, you know, all of a sudden men walking at dandies, fops, all of a sudden gender, you know, traditional standards that seem, as we know, to help inform and shape the mind as we engage with this very confusing world. We hold on to these things. We hold on to men do men things, women do women things. We are beginning to understand from a biological and scientific perspective that there is an actual basis in reality, that it's not just this is a good idea. You know, there are
Mm.
men's brains work differently. You know, women's brains work differently. We have different talents. We've been saying this forever, but now we're seeing that, you know, we were right to say it because it's being borne out by science, and not that we should trust science too much, depends on which scientist you're talking to.
Right. No, no, good point. Um, yeah, because I think it's interesting when you were talking about just how there was a shift with classical to Hellenistic, and almost too like like the shift in uh culturally maybe how uh people see their role. or and I think maybe beauty standards could be a part of that potentially of how we're living into our roles. I think maybe where I'm going with this off the top of my head as I'm saying it is, especially I think just thinking about the West, and you're in the UK, I'm in the US. I mean, I know for the US for sure. I mean, just beauty standards are crazy. Especially talking to women too. What's expected of a woman and what's bombarded with them on like what beauty looks like, right? When you're a young girl growing up, and there's all these makeup commercials, and you have to look this certain way, and here's your favorite pop star, and um, typically the pop stars, right, in the U.S. Typically they come from Disney, and they look like just totally nice, wholesome people, and then give it just a couple of years, and they're walking around with stakes on them, like Lady Gaga, or walking around like a demonic shaman or something. I don't know. But I guess when culture, I suppose, when there's that confusion there on roles, or there's that there's not really that like standard of like what are we? I mean, gosh, I think about back then, man, and like I just am always amazed, and maybe we could talk about this too as we're having this conversation. But you're just amazed at when I'm looking at art and just what people put their minds to, and the reverence and the beauty. It's timeless, right? When you see this stuff, and I know for you, your focus is late medieval. I mean, that's kind of my favorite stuff too. Whenever I go and look at art, but that kind of genre. But I look at today, and it's like, what are we? What standards are we working towards? And typically, right, it's, hey, I'm going to be an influencer and have this massive audience and keep them hooked, by really, I would say, mastering the craft of dopamine, and how to get people hooked with their dopamine on different things you say or that you show or whatever, versus I'm going to create this beautiful piece of artwork. And I think a lot in the medieval times, right? Like in Italy, I'm sure, is to glorify God, and to, especially the depictions of Christ. Like those are pieces of artwork that I could just sit there and just look at all day, and just, we're talking about this in the title, but the art of beholding, and just behold it, versus like, I want to consume this, like I want to eat this up. Because I think once beauty becomes consumable, or it's a commodity, uh, there's something there that the soul of it starts to get chipped away. What are your thoughts on
Yes.
that?
Yeah. So well put. I think that we do have to we do have to and dear gentle listeners, please, if you want to count your buttons while I talk about God for a little bit, I won't be offended. People always count their buttons sometimes when you start talking about God.
I like that. I like that way. I'm gonna steal that.
Yeah.
Count your buttons.
But
Okay.
Professor Alice von Hildebrand, and Tony, who's listening in, will be very delighted to hear her name mentioned several times, I think, because she has a lot of good stuff to say about this. She draws our attention to something very important, which is that our eyes and our ears, our senses, if we were are not the be all and end all. There is not simply a material basis to beauty. When one thinks about this sensibly, she gives the example. She says that if in all of the creatures that God has made, we have fairly average eyes. We cannot see as clearly. We cannot perceive and see and have direct sense experience of
Right.
light in the same way that eagles do. Dogs can hear way beyond the spectrum than we can, and yet they do not encounter or contemplate that which is beautiful. In all of God's creation, there are many creatures who can see and hear far better than we can. Just because one can see something clearly, and see more clearly than we can, it doesn't mean that they are capable of contemplating, encountering, and reflecting upon it. So it stands to reason as well that the inverse is true, that if our sight is impaired, it doesn't or our hearing is impaired, it doesn't necessarily have an impact on our ability to encounter or contemplate that which is beautiful. And as she says, Alice von Hildebrand says, God is beauty fundamentally.
Mm.
And he doesn't need to approach, and she's drawing very much from many medieval philosophers when she says this, God doesn't need to contemplate or reflect on beauty because its source is in him. We do, however. And when we end up looking at the aesthetics argument of what is beauty subjective, is beauty objective? Well, Alice von Hildebrand, and I would agree with this, says, well, no, there are some people whose conception or their inner ability to encounter, contemplate, or move towards that which is beautiful is impaired or immature or malformed, which is why there are some people who will turn around and say, oh gosh, how beautiful it was that Lady Gaga was wearing a dress made out of steaks. And there are some people, and this is, so this is something that people really, it's a kind of a very difficult thing to talk about today because we've been so used to this idea of democratizing everything, that everybody's opinion matters. But we know fundamentally that there are some things that are objectively more beautiful. And we therefore have to not train our eyes to be better or put on hearing aids or warp our bodies so that we can see more, or we can, I heard about somebody who had a chip implanted in one of their eyes so that they could see the infrared outside of the, I think, into the ultraviolet or infrared spectrum, like
the Terminator or something.
Terminator, I think.
Just scanning.
Yeah. But that's kind of the wrong approach, because there are,
I like what you're hitting on.
A blind person, a deaf person can have profound encounters with beauty outside of sense knowledge. It would be very different from ours. But where we're at the moment is that there is a fundamental organ, we might say, or a disposition or a faculty inside of us which we have completely neglected, which is what is beautiful. And is this something that is exciting? Is it desirable? Is it an hysteria or a malformation of beauty? Is it a higher beauty that is really worth pursuing? How do I reflect this? Does this lead me closer to God? Is one of my namesake St. Anselm and many others of his contemporaries would say, that is kind of one of the sniff tests, when you get the pint of milk out, is, it's on its date, sniff test. Does this lead me closer to God? If not, then you need to maybe ask yourself whether you need to do some work on your own internal beauty discernment,
Yeah, like a beautification of your soul. Man, there's so many good things that you hit on there, because I like, I think part of it, especially with the topic of like porn, right, is there were a lot of beautiful things in my life that I just didn't appreciate when I was really hooked on it. Because there was like that warping, I think, of standards, or really it was almost like there was that disconnection with God, really, with me, right? To where I was in a constant cycle of disconnecting my relationship with Christ, because I was choosing the sin repeatedly, right? Cyclically, almost like it was like a ritualized thing in my life, got embedded in my life, right? So I had this embedded habit that pushed me away from Christ. So then, right? I mean, sure, it's not like my whole like life in that period, right? I didn't admire beauty or behold it, but it was pretty fleeting, I would say, or not really, kind of like the milk you were saying, I was kind of like on its last day of, instead of I could enjoy it, but I think that's what porn does in a way, is that it warps that what we look at as beautiful and what we see as beauty, right? Because of course, with pornography, I mean, you're seeing naked people, you're seeing naked women. Like for me, that was such a hook for me, right? Because you're seeing whoever you want to see, the most beautiful people in the world, and you're seeing everything. And I love what you had to say to where, uh, I think as humans, we're not really meant to be like the eagles or have like X-ray vision to say, hey, like, I want to see anyone naked that I can. I don't think that's really how we were made or that we were developed for, right? That's something that technology has been able to provide to us. And I think you were talking about the printing press a little bit of when, that's when things really were like widespread with pornography. Like they were able to start printing things out and then distributing them. There was better access to that, right?
And
To where
privately, and
and
privately,
privately,
and that's
sure.
and whichever way you look at it, whether it's for politics or theology, one thinks about the Reformation. The fact all of a sudden that there were great tomes and volumes which would only be possible to access in a public space, and with the mass printing, it opens up many brilliant opportunities. Again, this is, as Tolkien would say, the evil of the machine, the ultimate evil, which, unless the developments in our technological capacities are met with a development of our fundamental human capacities, all that the technology will do is turn us to more expedient and efficient ways of committing evil in the end, to the detriment of the human person.
Mm.
Which is that's why the ring had to be destroyed. But we'll resist because the ring is the ultimate machine, of course. Right? But no, um,
Yeah.
no, I think that. Sorry, you were saying something.
No, go with your thought. I'll bounce off you.
I just wanted to read my friend Dominique's comment down below. And she's, in an elemental way, she's put it better than me. She says, "Is what I am looking upon, hearing, sensing a reflection of God's invitation to be perfect like your Father in heaven is perfect? Or is it
Mm.
leading to glorify myself or a created thing?"
Mm. Yeah, sit with that for a second, huh? That's great. Yeah, because I would say, right, like last
She's not
night
even on the
I s-
screen and she's stolen the show.
I know. Well said, Dominique. But when I think about that, right, like I mean the thing that comes to mind all the time is like seeing like a beautiful like sunrise or sunset, right? When I look at that, that's art to me. Like that's beauty. That's God's like he's painting on the tapestry of the heavens, and you're seeing this beautiful. And I'm lucky enough to live in Colorado to where you have got the Rocky Mountains. So it's just always the sunsets are always just, I love them. But like that, when I'm looking at a sunset, I'm not like consuming it, right? I'm beholding. I'm like, wow, like I'm standing back and I'm just in its presence. And I think that's what you're talking about, like in Dominique, I think with God and being beauty is that like really like I'm beholding. Like I can't create a sunset like, I can't do that. So I'm gonna sit back and I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to pray. I'm gonna clear my mind of whatever junk's in there because uh I just want to be in the present. And I just want to see this beautiful thing that's natural, that is undoubtedly beautiful, right?
Mm.
I think that's like what a lot of nature does. Like I've found in my life, like the closest I am to God a lot of the times is like when I'm out fishing or, I'm out hunting, I'm out in the woods. Uh, those are times of quiet where you're not just being bombarded. I think we've used that word a few times. Like I'm not walking around the woods and like something pops out and says, "Hey, like come over here, like look at this," or like buy this thing. I'm just out there with God in a way, right? And I think in the culture that we're in now, is this constant. Uh, I think I posted something on Notes. I think it was like some just old school those medieval artworks where there's like all the demons like hanging on this guy on this like saint, and I'm like that's like the modern man like just or woman right like logging on to like social media.
Yeah.
You're just being constantly bombarded by really I think things that we're talking about that lead to glorifying yourself or glorifying a thing, right? The vanity, the pride, or hey, I want to I want to be like this person and live the life that they're living. Meanwhile, you're not even connected really to your life and your spiritual health. But
And
no,
and as you
good point. Yeah.
say, those experiences, there is this old aphorism, and I can't remember quite where it came from, but um, and it's something that one of my friend, who's an art historian, who stood at my she got me in two ways. She got me into art history, and she also got me over the Catholic finishing line, as well. So, and she stood as my godmother when I was received, so it was deeply deeply intertwined. But she always would say, and does continue to say, I love nature first, and then next to nature art. Yeah, because it's a fundamental principle of art in the West until the last 300 years or so, let's say, certainly the last 150, that art is mimetic, that the visual arts are mimetic, that by mimesis, art is imitating life, or that there is something fundamentally precious and beautiful. And there are even disagreements among the artists. Some were Catholic, some were Protestant, some were pagans. There are different
Mm.
motivations about what the source of understanding, what the source of beauty is. I'm not just linchpinning this as they all believed that all beauty flowed from God,
Right.
right? But fundamentally, that there was something worth turning our attention to in nature that was so magnificent
Mm.
that it warranted our attempt to represent it in sculpture, in painting, in let's not forget the minor arts as well. I think that if so, even knitting, the crafts, pottery, all of these things which tend to
Writing.
be writing, all of these things are. And I think at the moment this is just not a very serious point, but I just as I'm speaking now, it does occur to me that I think that that there are plenty of people who are gifted and talented, artists, writers, creators in the world today. And if they, I wonder if they would, how much better at their craft they would be, and much happier they would be in doing it, if they understood how extraordinary it is and how profound it is to be capable, to have
Mm.
that inner beauty organ, to perceive the beauty and mastery of the created world and to reflect upon it. As I said, in all of this absurdly enormous universe, as far as we know, human beings, Homo sapiens, are the only beings in existence that can stop and think, what a
Mm.
beautiful sunrise.
Right.
The eagle sees it
Gosh.
better, the dog hears it better, but and yet we behave, if we don't attend truly to the call of beauty, that yearning to move towards beauty, which is an image of moving towards God.
Mm.
If we don't do that, then we actually make ourselves lower than a dog.
Mm.
We're acting contrary to our nature and our purpose. We have these
Mm.
gifts and we have these talents, we have these abilities, and we are not stewarding them responsibly. As one of the medieval philosopher, Richard of St. Victor says, he says, the human soul does not delight in itself. The human soul is not love. It does not delight in itself, but in the love that pours out forth from it.
Mm.
And I'll tack onto that with no expectation that it will be returned. And that
Mm.
is, as you said, the sunset. You don't look at a sunset and expect that it will appreciate you back. But in our
Right.
modern world, that is, I think, appreciating versus consuming beauty. And certainly an appalling thing when one thinks about how that has mutated and metastasized. Now with OnlyFans and so on, it is a distorted version of beauty that people are sort of yearning towards with malformed beauty consciences, we can call it. And they're being enticed and ensnared because what they have been mistakenly led to believe is a sunset is capable of messaging them back, even if
Mm.
it's just a chatbot or whatever it might be, you see.
Yeah, and I think these things of beauty, right? Like, I guess you could get like addicted to fishing. I guess. I mean, there's worse things to get addicted to, but like, I don't. I've never felt like addicted, where I'd have to skip functions to like go see like a sunset or a sunrise. Um, I don't know if I could put it any better. I'm not going to try to, because I think you said it pretty well. Something that I really like that you said that clicked though, just I think is really cool that you said it, was just how profound it is to create something. Uh, we're image and likeness of God. God's a creator, and then we get to create things, right? And I think that that's something that for a lot of my life, I just felt like I was in this like dormant stage of where I really wasn't like creating much. Like I think I was just really focused on like work, and you could argue I was creating things there, but like creating for the sake of like glorifying God, and like writing poetry, or even like the podcast or something, like those things have come more recently. But I love what you had to say there, because really it could be whatever gifts God's given to us, or whatever gifts that we feel like are being called to, and that we're honing them, of just being able to reflect on that and be truly like um truly proud of like saying, hey, like I created something, like I made something. I reflected on the world. This is my perspective on it. And I think we really, and again, I'm just speaking just from my point of view, right? Like I'm not saying that this is like a fact or anything, but it seems like in the world that we're in today, where we're so absorbed as consumers, I think that word just really strikes home of we're not really beholders as much, or creators. I think through industry and just through incentives, it seems like that we have been morphed or programmed into being consumers, where we're just, it's like I wake up with my phone, and it's just almost like there's like just a spoon that's just feeding me information,
Yes.
and then even with like sexual stuff, like I've got software. Even I pulled up that artwork that you were talking about, the Greek artwork, the Laocoon, I think, or what was it called? It's called the
Laocoon.
yeah,
Laocoon.
Laocoon. My software was like, "Hey, get that off your screen. Like it's nudity,"
And now a
which
quick
is
word from
cool.
our sponsors
Yeah, yeah. Quick word from our sponsors. Ever accountable. But no, really, I do have a code if people need that.
No,
But no,
seriously, because I know that I know that there are a couple of people I know here who I'm
yeah,
not naming them will be glad of hearing about it.
yeah. Maybe we could do a quick break for the sponsor. No, but no, I do work with. I
I can
have an
keep talking
affiliate.
about it until you get the code if you like.
Yeah, I got it up. I'll put the code in the chat here, and I'll have this on the podcast, like the notes and everything. But yeah, I did interview. I think it was back. It might have been like episode like 43 or something. But I interviewed the CEO of this company, Ever Accountable, and really cool company. Really like the people I've been working with there. But I've had the software on my phone, on my laptop for a little over a year now. The code I put in the chat's 20% off for a year, but they have a 30-day free trial. So you can do it for free for 30 days. If you still like it, you can keep it, and you get 20% off for the year. But it's really neat, actually. It has this, like I was just telling you, as I pulled up this artwork, it literally like flagged my screen and said, hey, like this is potentially like, triggering stuff, take it off. And then if you stay on that screen, it'll actually kick you out of that page. I had that happen. My dad and I were watching UFC fights, and you can adjust like your filters and stuff, but I had it like on the top one, and it kept flagging like, hey. And it was kind of funny. It was like two dudes kind of like on top of each other. So the thing was probably saying like, hey, like they're probably up to something here. Where hey, we're now if it was Greeks back in the time, then it would have been a little bit more obvious. Like they don't have any clothes on. But yeah, I guess just while we took a break there, I guess where I was going with that is we're in this environment, right, to where, like for me, like struggling with like porn for 20 years, I'm like, hey, there's no shame in this. Like I'm putting this on just on my devices just to give me that extra benefit, or that extra protection, or extra friction, so to speak, because we all get that sometimes, like you were saying, like sometimes we need a little bit of help, like, especially in the world we live in today, to where, hey, I'm going to go to the gym later today. And basically, 50, 60% of the women in there are, look like they are like on the beach. That's just how they're dressed. or if you're just like walking around. It's just like the way the culture is, man. People are just dressed a little bit differently, which
A little
I think
bit,
as a man, a
a
little
little
bit
bit.
differently. Yeah, a little bit, a lot of bit. Um, but like we live in this place today on the internet or in real life too, to where it's almost like we have to like opt out of the culture. We have to opt out of this environment that we're just in. It's like in order to do business or in order to have a life on the internet, it's like you have to be able to have that mindset of just saying, hey, this is where I go, this is where I don't go. Kind of like, back in the day of like you were saying, when these guys, when pornography started to be printed, I think back then, right? Like you kind of knew where like things were kind of more private, hidden. So it's almost like you'd have to go out of your way to go find this stuff. Or even if you're thinking about culture, like, early 1900s and all that, like really up to probably when the internet came along, you'd have to go to certain places or it'd be like more public. Like if you were going to go buy like a porn magazine, like you'd actually physically have to go somewhere. And then it probably became more of like, hey, now I'm going to order it in the mail. It's going to come here, but that's still trackable. Like if you're married or whatever, like that's still something that you have to kind of figure out. And then I think once it got to like computers and
Game over.
then it's like more game over, but there's still like I
There
still
is hope.
remember as a
There is hope.
yeah,
Not being literal game over. Sorry.
yeah. But I'd say like, as things have progressed, right? As we progress with our technology, as you're talking about, that's broken down like our inhibitions. It's broken down, I think, the needed friction, um, the ability to be like anonymous. At least when you're on your side, you think you're anonymous. On the other side of the deal, you're really not. Like they're still collecting and selling your data. But I guess where I'm going with it is that there's that progression over time, so to speak, with how culture has shifted to where it's just all there, enticing you, kind of like sitting out there, like, hey, go on YouTube Shorts. You're not going to see any porn, but then, hey, every once in a while, every few swipes, there's a really attractive woman that's being kind of seductive, and oh, she's showing you how to do a certain like stretch or something. And it's just those little tiny things that it's like, am I really interested in the stretch? Or am I interested in what my eyes are looking at?
Custody of the eyes, maybe
Mm,
Dominique. um, no, you're entirely right, and I think that this goes back to the principle of community. As I said earlier, that one of the great substantial changes was that until the mass printing press, and again, this is such a Tolkien thing, the technological innovation, the machine development and efficiency without there being a commensurate developmental revolution in the innate talents and capacities and discipline of man. Uh, and with the printing press, for example, it became possible for people to consume material of a variety of kinds
mm,
privately, en masse for the first time. And whether that's dangerous political ideas or eventually, and when we talk about the some of these seedy novels, I mean, it was flagrantly illegal, certainly in England. We still had laws, but the law was called gross indecency,
mm,
and even Lawrence Ferlinghetti, the beat poet, was had a very famous censorship trial because some of his work, because it was considered to be grossly indecent. I mean, that's a separate conversation about the subject of censorship. But
right.
what is present here is that um, technology has progressed without and given us the illusion very often that society or civilization has progressed, but it has moved. We have kind of moved forward, but mankind has been left behind. We haven't solved the problems that we've already got. And of course, I don't think, and again, thank you, Dominique, for reminding me of this. We were having a conversation about something vaguely connected to this just the other day. Uh, you know, I, for us, certainly as Christians, We live in the fallen world,
Mm.
and
Yep.
there is no amount of, yeah, we can be obedient to the will of God, to His law, to the natural law, to the divine law, and to the gospel and the fullness of its teaching. But we still retain concupiscence, as we would say as Catholics, and there is that inclination to err that even the most disciplined person is still potentially going to encounter. And for us as Catholics, we call it the near occasion of sin, which is exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about. There are certain, if you are an alcoholic, there are certain environments that you can't go to. There are certain, there are certain things that bad things will flow from this. But that is a realization that comes after the, usually when things have mounted up and there's been some damage or some problems going on. Community is one of the things that it is being sort of fraudulently, in a Frankensteinish way, being promoted through information technology, social media. People are increasingly becoming terribly lonely. I mean, even in spaces, you're in a room by yourself. You might be having great conversations and you might be connecting with people that you've never encountered before.
Right.
But good company keeps you. And this is something that, listening back to that interview that we did way back when, you were talking about the relationship that you have with your brother, and that there are these caucuses of men who are coming together, and also young women as well. There are plenty of women who are banding together to talk about authentic femininity and holding each other accountable. Men are also doing that in the same way. But it says everything, doesn't it? That the fundamental shape of, certainly talking about the porn thing, the hiddenness of it, is in itself. It rings at exactly the same frequency as Adam and Eve in the garden hiding from God.
Mm. Wow.
And if it weren't such a terrible thing, why the need to hide? And even in this increasingly pervertedly and distortedly permissive society, even people who all believe that pornography is fine, still consumed privately almost always. It still has all the trappings of shame wrapped around it. So this is going back to that brilliant statement that I started. I'm gonna, please put it on the record, update the minutes. I started it and Dominique perfected it. Does this lead me closer to God? Does this and one of the techniques, I don't know, and I'm not an expert in any way, shape, or form, and I don't want to give I don't want to be touted as giving advice, but I think of the practicing of the presence of God. I don't know if you're familiar with brother Lawrence, if you've ever heard of the practice of the presence of God, a great monastic man who, as part of his spirituality, was imagining or behaving as if Christ were always in the room.
Yeah, I know that.
And when one thinks of that, it's a very helpful reminder, regardless of, you don't have to have gone to theological college or seminary or be a youth pastor or whatever to understand, that is a very sensible way of ensuring that we're guarding our mouths and our eyes and our ears and our hearts, not just from disordered beauty, but that is a very important, because of course in Genesis God already knew where Adam and Eve were, and he still asked,
Right.
where have you gone? Because there is always this invitation for us to draw near to him. That is what he wants for us.
Yeah, and kind of harkening back to that, right? I mean, the big lynch point, I think, with humanity was like you were saying, was the hiding of it and the shame. And I think when I think about porn and my relationship with it, right, the redemption really starts when we're honest about it, and we tell the truth and we check it in. You brought up my little brother. I mean, that's something that we do every day. And we've been doing that almost for 3 years now, where we'll probably talk about in every podcast, but it's like one of the most crucial points of my recovery. And I say recovery a lot. I mean, it's just my life, it's not like this is some separate thing. It's just a part of who I am, right? And a part of who I am, I think ultimately, right, is I'm just aiming just to be closer to God, you know, closer to Christ. How can I do that? But one of the things is checking things in, right? And being honest about it. And I think that's such a great point too, of just, we are going to be deceived, and we live in a fallen world, right? So it's, every day. It's not, it's not like really like you take days off, but you're going somewhere, like you're going forward, right? You're going towards something. You're going towards God. You're going towards that beauty in your life. Um, so yeah, I thought that was really well said. Thinking about that, and I think that's just something that I hope people listening, or as we talk and as we think about this, it's like, what are those things like in our life, right, that are beautiful, and how can we behold them instead of maybe ignoring it, or not appreciating it enough. I think that's what happens too, like with porn and oh, this is kind of what I was thinking in my head too. You were talking about connection.
Community.
I mean, yeah, community. I mean, porn's like one of the most antithetical things you could think of when it comes to connection, community, right? It's not like it's not like I'm gonna like call Will up and say, "Hey, man, let's go watch a porn later," versus like, "Hey, like Will, let's go grab a beer,"
Right.
or I mean, and again, these things, right? Like, I know that there's people that are in the alcohol free space or the gambling free space, all that stuff, which I think is great. It's ultimately like, how's your relationship with that? But when you talk about all these different things that, could be vices, all these other things, like you still can do it with community. Like you can still go get like a beer with somebody, and like, that's fine. If it's okay with you guys. I think someone asked if you drink. Um,
No, complete perception. It's a running joke. Everybody
oh, really?
thinks that I oversell how much I drink as part of the shtick.
But I think that's just something to think about, though, right? Like, because I think about it a lot with porn, and why it's so different from all these other things is, and you nailed it, it's something that's done completely in secret, And I think there's some people that maybe don't see an issue with it, or maybe they watch it with their spouse or whatnot. I don't think that's like the majority of the population that we're talking about.
Well,
Yeah.
well, yeah. I mean, I understand. I understand when you said we were talking about porn, we were talking about the consumption of it by the end user, so called. But I mean, there is another thing that we do have to square up to, which is, aside from, even if we were just approaching this from a political, imagine that we're debating this on the floor of Congress or something, about there is a law to ban
Mm.
porn, right? We know now how corrupt and harmful and how far reaching the tentacles of even the production of pornography are. We are increasingly aware that even the websites, I mean, for us, we have in Catholic moral philosophy, and it's not, some of these things are common sense because they're baked into the crust of creation. We
Right.
have, material, we have a distinction between formal and material cooperation. And we would say that an individual is complicit. And in the 1980s, Pope John Paul II convened a council to talk and deal with extensively the media, pornography,
Mm.
the changing attitudes towards human sexuality. And he, at the close of this extraordinary document, which again I'll drop a link to in the post, you know, he renders it so clearly in a way that I think a lot of people will be staggered by. There are lots of people who don't give money to homeless people because they're worried that they'll spend it on booze. They wouldn't want, or, oh, if I could never live with myself, or, or with relatives who are struggling with addiction or whatever. I'll buy them food, but I don't want to give them money.
Right.
I'd never live with myself if I gave them $50 and they bought black tar, whatever. That is a very reasonable intuition about becoming formally or materially in cahoots, complicit in an action. Every single person, whether it is the website developer, the internet service provider, the chief executive, the financiers, the guy who holds the camera, the guy who books the Airbnb or whatever, the pornographer actors themselves, they are all, to varying degrees, complicit and cooperating in a vast network of sin and destruction.
Mhm.
We're aware now of the extent of human trafficking that is pushed through under the radar. The amount
Totally.
of extraordinarily appalling things. There is no way that any sensible person could look and think, why is all of this stuff being attracted to this particular thing? Um, Fundamentally, regardless of whether, let's say in a thought experiment that God didn't say it, or that it wasn't clear under the natural law, just looking at the world around us, that porn ain't good. There are, just looking at the arguments, just looking at the sheer facts of the implications and the consequences and damage that it does. No person who is in sound stewardship of their own consciences would ever wish to be part of that. So we've whistled past the graveyard a little bit, as my friend Kerry would say, because we were even far deeper. Like the pornography issue is subordinate to a greater moral deficiency at large for us as a society. What are we willing or convicted enough to stand up for about the fundamental nature and purpose of what it means to be a human person? Whatever, even for the old sort of classical liberals who, by and large, were either atheists or far enough up that hill to get a good view of the top, even if they didn't believe in God, they would say that there is a purpose to human life. There are better ways of living, and there are things that we should aspire to and aspire to preserve, and there are things that we ought to flee from. We are now in the inflection of this age is that people have stopped even asking those questions. Yeah, asking those questions, and so, of course, all of the problems that flow forth from it, pornography, abortion, divorce, whatever, they are symptoms of a hysteria, of a malformation in our ability to love and also to perceive beauty. Another thing that Alice von Hildebrand says is one of the most diabolical tricks that the devil, and she's speaking both literally and metaphorically, I suppose, has ever played in history, is convincing mankind that love is a subordinate function of sex rather than the other way around. Rather than sex is proper and belongs to love. And with the sexual revolution with the sexual revolution, and I mean, it all took place in such a short space of time, really, from the 1930s through to the 1970s, with the invention of and the promulgation of the hormonal contraceptive pill. In 50 years, 6,000 years worth of common sense understanding about how precarious the human condition is when it comes to sex, dignity, value, propriety, just undone. And when one thinks about it, sex is a beautiful thing.
Beautiful. Yeah,
The human body is a beautiful thing. But I'm reminded of what you had to say about the sunset. You don't ask for you can't consume the sunset. You can't expect the sunset to love you back. And some of the most beautiful things that exist in creation, we have to perceive at a distance because of where we're standing at any given moment in time. Maybe you missed that sunset. Doesn't mean maybe you missed the sense perception of it, but you can hear tell of it from other people. Yeah, and likewise with the sex and marriage thing, I despair of hearing young men and women, and now even boys and girls, who have essentially been programmed to hate themselves and believe that the only value that their body and life has is in being an object of use and consumption rather than an object of love. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, and sorry, I've gone very deep and got very severe. And now a quick word from our sponsors.
Quick word from our sponsors. That reminds me, I started watching the old like Alfred Hitchcock show. I don't know if you ever watched that Hitchcock Presents. But it's really funny at the beginning. He's like, "Now a word from our sponsors," and I think he'd always make some kind of joke. But yeah, no, I don't really have anything to plug right now.
To do that. We used to do that in coffee hour. We had a friend of ours, Roman Fly, who used to write these Duff.
Fun.
These fake,
I could do that.
It would be like one of his best ones was are you tired of waiting in the line for the confessional? Are you tired of waiting 25 minutes to get into the confessional booth, and you're standing behind a woman who's had one too many Werther's originals? And I think I only prayed 9 on that decade of the rosary. Well, introducing the No Sin Pass. You get the VIP line straight to the priest. For a low, low fee of $99.75. They were very good. They were great.
Oh my gosh, that's phenomenal! I love that. I eat that stuff up. But no, I think you said something about severe. I mean, it's a severe topic, and I think that's something that people, I hope to get across. When I talk or when I'm talking to you, or writing, right, is just to get across how severe it is, because I mean, I lived through that. I lived through a marriage of 5 years, divorce, and I mourn that a lot. I'm moving on with my life, but I look back on that and I'm like, wow, like what an opportunity I had there, right? But I was so pulled into this thing that it started to interfere, right? And it started to interfere with the beauty in my life, the beauty that really I promised to protect and to cherish, right? And instead, this other thing took a space. Because I think who says it? Is it Saint Ignatius talks about that the God-sized hole in us? Do you know that quote?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think it comes. Yes, Saint Ignatius of Loyola.
I'm going to pull up that quote because it just came up in my head. Let's see. Okay. No, Augustine, maybe? There is a God-shaped hole in the human heart that only God can fill. I think that's what it is. But when I think about that, when you have that hole inside of you, when you are sinning and you're sinning repeatedly, knowingly, even though, like for me, I thought that I could just somehow compartmentalize it or put it in a different compartment of my life to say, okay, hey, I'm following the rules, I'm following Christ, except for this little thing, which, hey, let's not talk about that. That's over here. I think that's where the hole was, though. Like I thought I was putting it away in a compartment, but really it was just opening up this gaping hole within me, right, to where God really needed to be there, but He wasn't, because I was, being willful in my rejection of Him, so to speak. And I think when there's that hole, something else is going to fill that hole, right? Like it's like a vacuum. Something's going to come in there, and I think that's where, like with porn, it can really fill that hole and it can deepen it, right? It like deepens the hole. It's not going to, I guess it's not really going to fill it up with anything of substance that's going to make you whole. It's going to drill down deeper and deeper and deeper. It's going to widen into other aspects of your life.
Yeah.
That's the way that I think about it. And with, I mean, when we're talking about this concept, right? It's like the whole begins to consume you. You think you're consuming something. Like you think that, oh man, like
Yes.
this is I remember as a kid, I was like, man, I can't wait till I grow up. I can just like watch as much porn as I want to. I feel like that's how I felt sometimes, right? Like, yeah, like when I'm in my own place and like, I have like my own stuff, I can just do this anytime I want. And it sounds kind of crazy, but I'm sure I'm not the one that's thought this in their young minds. But I think as you get older, at least for me, being on the other side of a divorce and being able to reflect on it, and really pray about it and repent, uh, it wasn't like I was really consuming anything. I was just being consumed personally
Right.
by a
It's very
vampire.
screw tape, right? It's very, in C.S. Lewis's screw tape letters, the 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 demons, the tempters, they dine, they have great banquets on human souls, and
Mm.
because they are empty. They have not. They are just they are a hole shaped hole, and uh that is this is I mean it's again it's C.S. Lewis, so I despair of him being considered a theologian because he's not, but he puts it in a way that's very accessible to people, which is exactly as you've said, that what what we do is, speaking of screw tape now, we trick and convince and mislead the human, the disgusting amphibious humans, these horrible hybrids who have both a body and a soul, unlike the angels who only have a soul, pure intellect, and a will. And we convince them that a second of ecstasy from doing something that their soul is capable of understanding is wrong is worth doing every single time. And we implement strategies and systems to increasingly embolden the animal, the body, at the expense of the man. So, at the expense of the soul. And that is one of the things that it's one of the great tensions, without getting too much into very arcane theological and philosophical historical backwater here. One of the
Sure.
great tensions that we've always had, one of the first great heresies um, of basically dualism, which is a component of Gnosticism and Manichaeism, and it reemerges quite terribly in the 12th and 13th centuries in France and Italy, is the idea that that there is the body is bad and the soul is good,
Mm.
and that, as the Cathars would say in the Albigensian heresy, that we are imprisoned, that our true selves, the whole true world is invisible, and this world was created. Everything that we can see, everything that's material, is corrupted. It was created by, I mean, basically, it's the lie that's told in the afterbirth, as well. That we are trapped in bodies, and we've somehow, we've this has crept in a non-theological, non-religious way, that you can see this in art. When you look at abstract art, when you look at the way that the human body is painted or depicted or drawn these days, by and large, it's my as my friend art historian mentor would say, we were at the Royal Academy in London several years ago at their summer exhibition, and most of it was quite recent art. And she just looked at me, and we were looking at all of these very expensive paintings, and she said, why do we hate ourselves so much that we can't even draw our bodies properly?
Mm. Mm.
And whew, we've gone 100% the other way now. That we've gone into dualism maxing. That I think that people, one hears people say, "Oh, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual," but but they don't take custody of those extraordinary faculties that we and only we have as rational beings created in the image of God. They want they want Christ without a cross. They want repentance they want forgiveness without uh, without repentance. They want rights without responsibilities. And gosh, all of us want that. That is what happens to us at the moment of sin. Something short circuits in us, and we presume upon the mercy of God, or if one isn't religious, we, you know, our flesh gets the better of our higher true faculties for a split second, and then it's gone, which is madness, isn't it? It's madness that, and that's why we know that it's a problem. That's why I think, as you said, that I think that there is one of the things that we must do and continue to do is not normalize, but certainly to men speaking with men, especially with young men now, to normalize the discussion of struggle and to provide the opportunity for these young men. And I hate it's appalling to even say grade school kids, right? This is how bad it's got. The years down the line, I used to feel that way too, one might say. And and you're right to feel that way. Your friends at school might say there's nothing wrong with it. But to see the full trajectory is, again, going back to community. We can't, any of us do this alone. It is not good for man to be alone.
Yeah, I think that's something well said, man. And I was just pulling up, I might paraphrase this, but with, I think it's John chapter 3, verse 6, flesh gives birth to flesh, but the spirit gives birth to spirit. I mean, it really took me a while to really hit that. I mean, I've been going to Bible study now for, I think, close to 6, 7 years with the same guys, off and on as I'm traveling. And I think the more we've been getting into things, especially like Romans, the more like I've thought about like what it means, like when I'm thinking about like the flesh and the spirit, and just how much like sin is that I guess the byproduct, or I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but when we pursue these fleshly desires, and it's not just sexual, right? It can be a lot of different things of the world, but
Theft, lies, gossip, deceit.
yeah, and just how like I think you were saying that earlier, like lowers like our frequency, lowers our ability to love,
Yeah.
our tolerance. I always felt like when I was younger too, I just would get so quick to be like angry at things. Like I just had such a short fuse, and maybe that's just part of being a younger man. But I do think that because I had that inner divide and that inner conflict within me, to where it always just felt like that. It like literally just always felt like um, I wasn't really asking for full forgiveness of this thing because I didn't really know how to stop doing it. So then it just felt like, well, why would I ask forgiveness if I'm just going to do it again? Which, I mean, it's kind of like, oh, there we go. That's your answer. But, um, yeah, man, like I just, when I think about it, and just like the way that you've been putting it as we've been talking about it, like culture, I think that's like the thing, like with me, like why I'm so passionate about talking about like pornography and like my experience, like talking to others about their perspectives about it. And I think you've shared some wonderful perspectives today about this. But I just think as like a Christian, like it's a repeated sin that we do. Like there's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. Like there's nothing that like I could tell myself that's gonna justify my actions as a Christian doing it. This is the cold hard facts about it. There's no sugarcoating it. And I think the quicker I got to that, the quicker it really clicked with me. Of like this is denying a very uh, important thing in your life is your relationship with Christ. Like your relationship with the divine is like the most important thing. Most important things in our life, I would argue, is our relationship with Christ, because everything I think else like stems from that in our life. And that's what I look at when I was really hooked on porn. And, with that is it was like a repeated action of distancing myself, of being consumed by something that's dark, by something that's not reciprocating. And that's why I talk about it being like a vampire so often, right? Because I think there's so much comparison that you can do. But I mean, even if you're just thinking of like whatever take of the vampire though is like there's a spell that it puts on you. And in order to come into your home, you have to invite it in. Which I always think that when the vampire movies or like books or whatever like nail that, it's so creepy. I don't know if you watched that movie Sinners. I thought it was pretty good. But they did a really good job of that aspect of it to where like the vampire's like trying to get them to say like come in.
Mm.
And they were doing a good job of being like, hey, like, no, we're not doing that. Uh, but when I think about that, right, it's almost like, well, if you do invite it in, then there's like that trick that's like, hey, like you signed your name on this contract, like I own you now. I think that's what the devil tries to tell us is, hey, you're 10 years old, you looked at porn, like you're going to hell. That's how I thought in my mind growing up. Because I went to Catholic school growing up. And I think I don't know, like that there's still some things that I'm battling with that, but I think as I grew up, I just inherited, like, that shame really became a huge part of me to where I already felt like I messed up so much that I could never be forgiven for it.
Mm.
And I think that's kind of what the vampire does when it's feeding on you is be like, hey, like, you're already like this tainted, soiled creature. And like, you're mine now. Like, you're going to become like a vampire too, live forever and all this stuff. But it's all like a lie. And the whole time, like Christ is like right there. Like Christ is like right there. Like he's waiting for you. Like he's going to be as patient as possible. Sometimes maybe not. Like there's going to be things in your life that are going to really wake you up to Christ. And sometimes it has to be that way. I know for me, like I had to go through some rock bottom moments. I think a lot of people do when they find Christ, which is interesting to think about. But I guess my
Well,
whole
it's a
point with
lot.
that is,
Yeah,
yeah, go.
it's a lot. There's this old Greek expression, chalipatakala, that beauty is harsh, beauty is terrifying, and
Mm.
the love, the where if people haven't, whether people have been raised in 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 with knowledge of the gospel, or whether they've never heard it and encounter it later. I mean, in many instances, there is the kind of second calling, even for people who've cut, even pastors' kids, have to make up their minds and earn it for real, right?
Right.
Um, it's a very terrifying realization.
Yeah.
It is overwhelming. It is overwhelming because it makes no sense. I have here in front of me. I have this on one of my kitchen cabinets. Poem by George Herbert. Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. But quick-eyed love, observing me, grew slack from my first entrance in. Drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I lacked anything. A guest, I answered, worthy to be here. Love said, ye shall be he. I, the unkind, ungrateful, my dear, I cannot look on thee. Love took my hand and smiling did reply, who made the eyes but I?
Mm.
Truth, Lord, but I have marred them, that my shame go where it doth deserve. And know you not, says love, who bore the blame? My dear, then I will serve. You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat.
Wow. Got some goosebumps from that one.
Yeah. Herbert knew
That's
how to write a
beautiful.
poem.
For sure. And that's art in itself, what you just read to us. That's beautiful. Yeah, it's almost like you feel like you're not worthy of even beholding it. Yeah, at times. Kind of
Well,
reminds me in a
because
way.
we're not.
Yeah,
Because we're not.
right. That's true.
But that's the fundamental. That is actually the thing that is not said, that should be said in Catholic primary schools. It should be said in Sunday schools. It should be said in Bible studies. I know that I know that one hears it say, it's a beautiful, it's what Hillsong put, it's a beautiful exchange, and but we are creatures, fallen, far from God, and yet He came.
Mm.
And everything that comes is unmerited, and there is nothing that we could ever do that could merit His descent, the divine condescension of the inevitable descent, divine dilemma and the inevitable descent. And that is something that one has to make peace with. And it's very difficult. And that is one of the reasons why so many people struggle with their Christian faith in the world of today.
Mm.
Because the self, the individual now, has been almost deified in full Screwtape fashion. I don't need saving. This idea of democracy has blossomed outside of politics. That I will not serve. Why can't I? Why can't I be as him? And accepting our limits, accepting our flaws, our fallibilities, is one thing. It's another thing to know that we're still loved infinitely, in spite of it. That is, and that is where the feelings of shame slide in. And shame again is just some of the great Benedict XVI and JP2 write about this as well, when they say that shame is just an hysteria of a very good faculty in mankind.
Mm.
Shame is shame that consumes is you can't feel shame to that extent unless you have the capacity to know what you ought to do. It'd be far more concerning if you didn't feel any shame.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I feel like for me, I was like so numb in a way to where like I had it, but it got to the point to where it was almost like so overwhelming that I just had to like numb it out for a while. And I think what happened with me, at least in my marriage, was then it all came due. All this bottled up shame. I didn't manage it well, but I think that's a really good way of putting it. Shame's not necessarily a bad thing to have because, I think in like, kind of like Peter talks about like the commandments being there, let like that you can't like know the commandments without like knowing like sin. And I think that's in a lot of the ways too, like with what you said. And I think I had a previous guest on, Jamie Hoskin, who's a counselor, biblical. She has her theology degree, and she was talking about how, yeah, like shame can be like one of those things to where, like, really, I think if you're looking at it a healthy way, it's just us to say, hey, like you could have done better. Like God's calling you for more. But if you go inward with that, right, like you were talking about, when we focus more on ourselves, when we just focus more on maybe that pride, or that we're not thinking about God, I think that's when shame can be really difficult.
Yes,
Because then you don't
then
really see a way out of it.
And it becomes
Right, right. And instead of acknowledging that there's grace there, that there's grace that is given, that the price has been paid. We have to accept that.
And that's the strangest thing, and not in a personal in relation to any of your backstory, but
Mm-hmm.
For us as Catholics, it's so extraordinary that sacramental confession is so misunderstood because in the movies it's portrayed as this deeply shameful, appalling thing. But it really is not just quite literally, it is an actual instantiation of grace being received and absolution and the slate's wiped clean. But I mean, there are, according to Catholic theology, circumstances in which it's possible without sacramental confession. But by the by, there is something extraordinary about marking that landmark of making an act of contrition. And acknowledging one's failings, but doing so in a state of mind and a disposition in which one earnestly says, I earnestly resolve to avoid the circumstances where I, the near occasion of sin, to amend my life and to sin no more. And you might be back there the next day, especially, with, this is the thing with young men in particular, with what we call these besetting sins. As long as in that particular moment, one is, it's an extraordinary thing. It is an extraordinary thing to wipe the slate clean and predispose oneself to receive that grace and that forgiveness from God. And I know again, people will be counting their buttons as we're talking about this, but it's the great paradox that in the worm there is no righteousness. And this is the terrifying thing about the beauty that is God. How, why? How, why? Who am I? Who are we that God ever wants anything to do with us? Or even created us in the first place? Or, more importantly, sent his only son to die for us, who went willingly to his death and could have dissolved every single person who laid a hand on him into atoms, just by blinking. It is a mystery, and that mystery is love, and all other loves are just images of the love that flows from God. And in Sorrentino's The Young Pope, there is this great line. The new Pope John Malkovich is this English reclusive cardinal who's been appointed Pope. And in his first address to the cardinals, he says, you will come to me and you will tell me all the problems of the world. You will say that men are murdering women and women are murdering their children and children are murdering other children. And I will say to you, these are all hysterias of love. These are all distortions of our innate ability to love. We are attempting to reach and move towards something, but very often always towards the wrong things.
I think as you were saying that, it kind of harkens back to what you were saying earlier about the flipping of love, being at the top of the hierarchy, and then there's sex. Whereas the flip is that you can, love is derived from sex. And I think as you were talking about that, I really love how you put it. Like, it's a distortion of the ability to love. And gosh, I think porn fits right in there, right? I talk about it a lot, but I think for me, what really locked in porn for me was there was that distortion of, maybe feeling accepted or feeling validated or feeling that I had attention, or that I could go somewhere where I felt, I felt like this, whatever I'm watching here is made for me and for my pleasure. And it became a way, a mechanism, almost like a distortion of that, to where those are things that you can receive in your life that are when they are from love and when they are from that place, they're the best thing, the best, because it's God really moving through other people or through your interactions with the world. Whereas I think with porn, it's the distortion of that, right? And the distortion of, we were talking about earlier, sex being such a beautiful thing that God created for us, that creates life, and to see it distorted in such a way, right? And then I think maybe to top on what you were talking about earlier with younger men, younger generations, it's something I think about that every day. Is just, you're like a 10-year-old boy. That's how young I was when I was first exposed to it. And when I was 10 and I was exposed, I mean, that was really like my first introduction my first introduction to like what sex looked like and like what that was. And I knew like when I was watching it that, hey, we're doing this in secret. It was at one of my good friends, like in his dad's like office or something in the middle of the night. And it was one of those things that, kind of reminded me of the Adam and the Eve of being alone and hiding and doing such a thing. But I just think of like the 10-year-olds, right? And the younger kids to where they're first exposed to this thing that I would consider it as like a traumatic event to where you see stuff that you have no comprehension of like what this is and like what these people are doing, but somehow, it's enticing to you, this feeling, this pull, this magnetism. And it starts you off on the foot of just being, at that point, you have this picture in your mind or you're seeing it actually happen. And that gives you a picture of like what sex is and like what is this stuff. And off the bat, when you're a young kid, and this is before I wrote an article about, how I had a relationship with porn before I even had like my first kiss,
I remember you
my
saying
first
that it
girlfriend.
was, yeah, it hit like, yeah, and that's just that's becoming it's just become ubiquitous now. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Cause then it's like, well, we look
and,
at all these things because, oh, go ahead.
and remember as well, I did a friend, Heidi Thomas, Heidi Hill, forgive me, um, we read through all of John Milton's Paradise Lost, aloud with discussion from people of a variety of different backgrounds. And Heidi said something that I'd never even thought of before, and I don't actually think any of the church fathers, I think maybe one off the top of my mind, reflected on the fact that, they clothe themselves, they cover themselves with fig leaves. Fig leaves contain both, fig leaves are, uh, contain uh, a compound that is kind of caustic to the skin, and
Mm.
also the kind of the almost got tiny little hairs or barbs on them. So they covered their nakedness of all the trees in Eden. They punished themselves after eating the
Huh.
tree of
I've
knowledge.
never thought of that.
They covered their nakedness with something that would hurt. Something again. Let's not don't let's not make a theology out of that, but it's worth, there are these signs and interesting trap talk, and it was just extraordinary as Heidi was saying there, that is it speaks very deeply, doesn't it? I think to um certainly what we would call besetting sins, that there is a system of punishment, and so that's again the horror of it, that first there is the trick of believing that separating yourself from God is worth an instant of gratification, and then on top of that, there's this 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 waft of self-loathing, and also pointless and empty self-punishment that doesn't even restore one to proper relationship with God, much like covering yourself with fig leaves, you know.
Yeah, I think Bob said something in there, self-flagellation. Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it. Um, it's like, yeah, we almost resort to that instead of the other way around of coming back to our Father and saying, "I'm sorry." Can you like? I always love the story about the prodigal son too. It's like one of my favorite. You know, just being in the pig pen and
Yeah.
then the father still being like come here, like come home. And I think that's in a lot of ways. It's like, and maybe this is maybe kind of landing the plane with our conversation or transitioning it, because we've been talking about, and thanks again for just all your time and sharing it with us. And I mean, gosh, the fig leaves, I didn't even think about that. So that was something
Neither
I'm
did
like,
I.
whoa.
Thank
Yeah.
thank thank Heidi, and follow her on Substack.
What's Heidi's name?
Heidi Hill, Heidi A. Hill, at Heidi A. Hill.
Okay, I'll write her name down. Um, but we're
She writes
basically been
fantasy
talking.
novels as well, by the way, which you'd probably like. She writes fantasy novels.
Oh,
It's like
okay, I
Narnia
like that.
meets the Wild West.
Oh, ooh, okay, I like
Not,
that.
I mean,
The Wild.
kind of. If I were handing out Pulitzers, I would be tying first place with Lord of the Sword right now.
Okay, this is a throwback, but I think I told Will this once. That yeah, I have some old manuscripts somewhere in here where I basically kind of ripped off Lord of the Rings when I was like a young middle schooler. Maybe I was like sixth or fifth grade or something, and I think I wrote three novels. They're not that big, and they're probably really badly written and misspelled. But basically, it's Lord of the Rings, except like instead of rings, they're like magical swords. But I did give the elves wings, and there's like griffins and stuff. So I like, I did a little bit of, I took some of like my own stuff and put it in there. But yeah, it's kind of like when I was reading Robert Jordan, because I read the Wheel of Time, which I really enjoyed it. But like the first book is pretty much like the Fellowship of the Ring. But hey, it's enjoyable. It's like, hey, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So that's kind of what I did as a young middle schooler. But yeah, we might have to dig that up, man. And I was telling Will that he might have to do like the audiobook readings of Lord of the Sword. But with our conversation, right? Like we went really deep, and I love it, man. So hopefully y'all listening, are writing some stuff down, or some things are resonating with you, because I definitely feel like things that resonate with me. But I think we've been talking a lot about maybe like what's wrong, or what's maybe more of the deeper things, and I think we are cutting to some of the things that are like we need to go back to, right? Like things that are positive. But I think maybe the last segment of this conversation, we can talk more about. I think you said something to me when we met, was like re-beautifying, the world, and maybe that's where we can kind of land the plane with the conversation. Is just like, okay, hey, we're talking about all these concepts. We're talking about history and how, how maybe pornography proliferated, or how beauty is turned more into like a commodity or consumption. Well, it's like, okay, well, today, like, how do we get back to a place to where the standard of beauty is respected again, or there's dignity around it, and what does that look like in our lives and in our culture? And I think we were saying maybe this is something too that we could start with. I remember you mentioned to me something about just like the aspect of a woman breastfeeding in public, and how, even probably like 20 years ago or something, it wasn't like seen as something like, like women would just do that in public. And now it's like there's all these different products you have to buy, and, different things that you have to do to like cover up and all that. And maybe we could start with that, and that could lead into our final conversation. But you mentioned something about that. I was really interested.
Yeah, I think that, going back to how we ended up hating our bodies so much. There, a mother who has just had a child, her body is doing exactly what it ought to be doing. And when she's breastfeeding, and look, there are rules. I'm a bit of an old English stick in the mud snob, right? That there are, that it's just that there are things appropriate, whatevers. But we've seen that very often it's not actually men who are driving forward this women shouldn't breastfeed. It's women. You actually see that it's women saying you should do all of this other stuff. You should actually not. You should not breastfeed as you normally would, because people will stare. It's not right. It makes people feel uncomfortable, and that is again indicative, I think, of this deep rot that's set in. That how has it got to the point that one of the most extraordinary things that any human being, women can do is not give new life and nourish and nurture it. How has it gotten to the case that women, in some way, shape, or form, very often actually have a very disordered relationship with their bodies and hate their bodies, or have grown to to be cautious or suspicious to such an extent that the beauty of seeing the child in the mother's arms being nourished. And I'm not saying let's everybody go around and
Right.
get your disposable camera, but that is just one example of we are treating that which is made in the image of God as though it's lower than a dog. And somebody just Max, somebody is somebody.
Yeah, Dominique said something. Do you want me to say it or you want to say it?
Read it, please.
Okay. What is needed starts at the level of each person. Each of us needs to turn our eyes, our minds, and our hearts to God. Then it extends outward. We can't expect an external cure for an internal problem.
Yes.
Well said,
Yeah.
Dominique.
So, and everybody will think that I've stolen it from her now, but that was where I was going to go after the breastfeeding thing. We've already mentioned.
She's a mind reader. She's ahead of us.
We share news. We've already talked about a lot of the things that I think are very important, which is the minor arts, cooking. And I know these things sound very silly, but nurturing the internal, first and foremost, make sure that, well, look, I don't want to sit here and give advice about what people on the other side of the world ought to be doing in terms of whatever, but when it comes to how beauty will save the world, I think that we have to re-establish our inbuilt expectation that we will encounter beauty and we are encountering beauty, and to be mindful of it when we do. And that can be that can be a beautiful meal with family. It could be lasagna. And I think also, gosh, I'm trying to be very cautious because I'm mindful that there's a diverse audience here, because I don't just want to say what the Roman Catholic Church says is the solution to this issue, but certainly the common denominator of anything that I would say is that our beauty consciences, as I described it earlier, as I summarized Alice von Hildebrand's point, that bit of us which is capable of discerning and contemplating beauty. I would encourage people to consider and explore how in good shape that part of them is. And we must always, all of us do that. But again, as it's been, you've heard it in stereo, is this leading me closer to God? Is this leading me closer to what I know is true and beautiful and sustainable? And not just sustainable in terms of in my benefit or my interest, or in terms of sustainable, or rather sustaining. There aren't very easy solutions to these questions, especially for the young ones.
Right.
But I think those of us who are maybe a little bit further down the line can make space and just keep banging on about beauty and how beauty will save the world. Because, if you ask most people what is beauty these days, they maybe possibly couldn't tell you. So maybe that is goes some part way to a via media to giving a solution that isn't just Catholic pilling. But, I'd encourage everybody listening to ask themselves, do I know beauty when I see it? You don't have to define it in exact terms, but do I know what beauty? Do I know what is beautiful? Is this beautiful? Can I find beauty in this? And I think as time goes on, it's actually astonishing how present beauty is, how those transcendentals we find, goodness, beauty, and truth, they're very often where we least expect to find them.
Yeah. And I think when you're in that frequency, right, and you're closer to God and you're living your life in that way, you will find the beauty in just about anything, you know,
Mm.
in interactions, and maybe someone shares a story. I think one of my favorite things about this Bible study I've been a part of, pretty much with the same guys for close to 7 years, which is really cool. But whenever we pray before, when we pray after we're done, it's just amazing always hearing all the guys go around and like what we're praying for. And sometimes it's prayers of praise, right? Sometimes it's like, hey, so and so is really sick right now. Um, there's so much beauty in that, I think, just as human beings with each other, being vulnerable, sharing, what's what's going on in our lives, and thinking about other people too, right? I always love that, thinking about actually praying for somebody, uh, and how connected we all are, really. I would find like when there's times in my life where I'm closer to Christ and I'm in the Word and I have that mindset, and that's the way I'm looking at the world with my eyes and with just how I'm interacting with it. You see so much beauty. You see what God's created and you're like, wow, this is amazing. How can I be a part of this? How can I be a contributor? How can I be a steward? How can I be a partner? How can I be part of this community to where we're preserving, what is sacred, you know? And I think that when you were talking about it too, so I think I shared on Substack when I was kind of prepping people to come on. I was sharing some of my past trips. So I went out. It was actually my honeymoon where we went out to England and we spent a day in Paris. But we actually stayed like a few blocks away from the Abbey, which ended up being my favorite place. Like literally, could just walk to it, and it was right around New Year's. So I loved it. But what I'm trying to get at here is like some of those, like the cathedrals and the artwork you see there, like the history, like those things you look at and you're like, there's no doubt about it. Like this is beautiful. Like you could be an atheist or whoever, and you walk into the Abbey and you're going to be blown away just by the amount of work that's been put into it.
Well, they were designed. I mean, Gothic architecture was specific. Maybe that's a conversation for another time, but Gothic cathedrals were specifically designed with the explicit intention of every single component of them from within, leading the mind towards a contemplation of true beauty. There's Abbot Suger of Saint Denis, who is credited as being not the inventor, but the first proponent of Gothic architecture. Stained glass and beautiful surfaces and mural surfaces. And he wrote, "May I travel through the lights that reflect within this abbey, that I may travel through those lights and upward through a door to Christ, who is the true door." So, and look, it works. I mean, it's not just because they're enormous. It's not just because they're colossal. It's not just because we don't build that way anymore. I mean, we need, it's, the medievals understood very, very brilliantly that we need as much help as we can get from the way that we plan the world around us. We need constant reminders of beauty. We need constant jump starts. We need constant opportunities to participate in the contemplation of the good, the true, and the beautiful. They knew that very, very, very well, which is why they went to extraordinary effort to design. Well, it's one of the reasons why they went to such effort to design the architecture in the way that they did. And, you know, yeah, I mean, we could,
Yeah, maybe that's another podcast there. Because yeah, it made me think about there was a maybe it was a month or two ago at my church they were talking about altars, and I think it was like in the Old Testament they were talking about just as the Israelites were traveling, there'd be different landmarks or holy altars and places that would remind you of your faith and why we're on this path. And yeah, man, that's another conversation, but it just blows me away of, like you were saying, with the medieval times and all these just incredible, like absolutely just incredible, breathtaking works of art and of beauty that you see. And it's like today, like, what is that? How can we revive that to where we all are drawn and we want it, we desire it, we want that beauty in our world and those reminders of God. And how does that look like? And I think ultimately, I think Dominique and you hit it the nail on the head. It starts like within us. And I think that's maybe the answer, right? When you're thinking about just culturally is like, if Nietzsche said like, God is dead, and if that's how our culture is, which I still have hope, but you definitely could see that um, people have internalized that in some ways where the hole that's been carved out has become us, where we're basically worshiping ourselves. And it's like, where is that taking us? Where is that taking us with beauty and like what's beautiful in the world? Yeah. Going down to the bottom floor. But yeah, so I know we were a little over 2 hours here. I know it's probably getting a little bit later for you. But I wrote down a lot. I've got my notebook here. And I think we covered a lot of really good stuff today, man. I think my biggest takeaway really it's like those questions that you ask and make to reiterate it is like, what is beauty? Do you know beauty when you see it? What is beautiful? And like having that definition, at least as a Christian, I think for me and what we were talking about is this pulling me closer to God? I think that's a great way of putting it. But yeah, anything else that you'd like to share with the audience as we're closing this down?
No, I'm quite happy if anybody has any questions, if anybody wants to drop them down, see now forever hold your peace. If that's sorry, I'm
yeah.
I'm so used to hosting that it's just
I know, yeah. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, and maybe I didn't, but Will he hosts like the Catholic X community spaces on Twitter X. That's where episode 30 came from. Was I actually shared my story with him on his X. So if you have Twitter, follow Will, and I'll include that information there. When we're all done, I'll make sure to add in Will's information so you can follow him on Twitter on X. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to get Will to be more on Substack, because Substack's the place to be. So that's why I want to have Will on too, just so that you all got to meet him, and definitely subscribe to Will and what he's doing, because I think he had a lot of profound insights, and I think we need more of that, in this world of that community, especially as Christians, to be able to talk about these concepts and to really flesh them out and just have a discussion about it, right? To where people, like you were saying, like something that spurs on that thought, that gets us there, at least that doorway where we can, right in the doorway of the church, be like, hey, like let's go inside, let's see what it looks like in there, and like let's talk about things. Let's see. Nietzsche, Dominique said, Nietzsche warned that if God is dead, it becomes a world and a life of will to power, and we are living that outcome in our cultures of death. Whew. Yeah, that's pretty deep.
You just ruined the atmosphere. We were having such a good time, Dominic.
No.
Goodness me.
And then she said something about where do you buy your wine, and which
Don't
is your
encourage
favorite vineyard?
Don't encourage her.
That's funny. Um, but no, I really appreciate everyone being on. I know it's like a Saturday, wherever you're at, and just being able to spend a Saturday to listen to this conversation, to be a part of it. Just really appreciate it. I know, Will, I didn't ask you about this. I was planning to, and then we just kind of jumped into things. But typically, whenever I have a Christian on, um, if there's anything else you want to say, if you want to close us out with a prayer, if you're comfortable with that, we could do that.
Yeah,
Are
of
you
course.
okay with praying us out?
Of course.
Okay, cool. But yeah, anything else anything else before we end, any words of wisdom or summations before we pray?
Do the sniff test. Do the sniff test when it comes to any question of beauty. And yeah, I don't want to get preachy. It's because I do that when I'm on my own home turf, but no, do the sniff test. No, it's very good, encouraging thing to say. And
Yeah,
beauty will save the world.
I think I had a guest that said that the soul doesn't lie. But sorry, I'll pass it back to you. Beauty will save the world.
Yeah, that was it. Full period. Beauty will save the world through Jesus Christ. Beautiful.
Amen to that. Yeah. Hey, but yeah, if we want to do a quick prayer and then
Of
we
course.
can head out.
In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. Have mercy on me, O God, in your great mercy. According to the fullness of your compassion, wipe my sins away. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them as trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Lord Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom.
Amen. Well said, man. Well said. Well, hey, what a great way to spend a Saturday. And whenever you're listening to this,
it's been a real treat, even though I came in half wet from the storm, and literally with not even 2 seconds to spare. I was three minutes in debt by the time we started. It's been a treat. It really has been a treat.
Well, hey, I'd love to have you on again. I think next time maybe we talk more about some of these cathedrals, because I have some questions about that have been popping in my head a little bit. But yeah, everybody subscribe to Will, check him out, and we'll do more of this stuff in the future. So thanks again, Will. It was a treat for me too, man. And have a great rest of your evening and weekend. And everybody,
have the rest of your day. What is it now? It's like
thank you.
1:30.
Yeah, it's a beautiful Colorado day out. It's probably in the 50s, which means I can wear my shorts. But no, probably get outside, walk the dogs, do some stuff like that, maybe some writing. We'll see. But hey, everybody, thank you. Keep fighting the good fight. Much love. Talk to y'all later. Bye.